Honor. Fold my pinky promise.
Look at that. Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you. There are two witnesses.
Oh, okay, that's fine. I just needed to higher numbers on it.
Yeah, thank you.
Judge, this doesn't make sense. Do you have a sense of tomorrow afternoon, because we're thinking about witnesses and family, but put that aside. But
Sure.
I mean, there's some long witnesses coming up. And I was talking to Mr. Rucker about, you know, we're going to end up putting up a witness at 2 o'clock, and we all were hoping to be out of here by 3:30 to keep it across.
Right, I was thinking 4, but I don't know what works for folks' commitments. I'll obviously check with the jurors, but if we arrive at a time that works for us, I could say this is the plan and see if we go. So, do we go to 4?
That's fine with me.
Okay.
Mr. Rucker and I need to, because there's 1 or 2 long witnesses.
Sure.
If he puts them up at 2, I'm not going to be able, we're not going to be able to cross.
Right, we shouldn't do that.
So you need to figure out, can we quit at 3 if the only witness left is a long one?
Yeah, I mean,
We're getting down to the last few witnesses. So.
well, as long as they stick with what Mr. Rucker calls the cheat sheet, there are not that many left, but then these people keep popping up. But please don't structure it so that at noon on Friday you say, well, the only witness left is a 6-hour witness, so we have to leave at noon. If that is possible. Put differently, if there are 4 witnesses left at noon on Friday, let's put up as the next one that is realistic to assume that we get through in the afternoon, even if that's a little bit out of order, because that's a half a day that we're giving up, and that would be frustrating. So, but I appreciate that it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to call a witness at 3. You only get halfway through the direct. You might as well do none of the direct because you'll want to redo it all a week later. Okay, Zing, you ready? Let's go on the record. It is Thursday morning. Good morning, everyone. Mr. Rucker, anything from the state before we get started? Ms. Griffin?
We do have a stipulation by the parties to the results of the toxicology testing.
Okay.
And I think last time we agreed that you would need the stipulation.
Sure, whatever time you want me to do that, I can do that.
Okay, you're ready to give it to you now?
That would be great. So does this mean there's a witness who won't be testifying?
Yes, Ms. Mary Jo Brash.
And Mr. Harvey, you signed it, you're okay with the stipulation?
I signed it, and I think Mr. McIver has a condition that needs to be my signature.
That's correct, I see that. Great, so just let me know when you want that read in. Anything else from the state?
Another day, Mr. Samuel and I compromise. We got together this morning.
I didn't compromise. She agreed to everything.
Whatever makes sense, whatever he wants to call it.
Yeah.
There are 3 articles that we identified. We went through redactions on 2 of those. One of them, I understand there's no objection to any of the content. The other 2 I redacted. I provided him copies of redactions this morning. So I'll give him a chance to review that, and then hopefully we can make an announcement about potentially not only the article, but the witness associated with it as well.
Okay, these are all related to Schneider, or at least Hobbs and Schneider?
Both
Okay.
such articles.
Okay. Well, just keep me posted. I appreciate the 2 sides working together to have this move along smoothly, and we'll get an update from Mr. Samuel. My advice would be to try to do it while Mr. Samuel's here. Mr. Harvey looked like he might lose an internal organ when you were doing the video.
I picked up on that as
Samuel
well.
wasn't here.
Yeah.
They intentionally waited until I walked out.
Yeah.
Anyway, fine.
Okay. All right. Anything else?
And I have one issue I wanted to flag and make the court aware as well as Mr. Harvey. I expect that at some point this morning we will get to the firearms examiner from the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. And as part of his testimony, as the court knows, one of the central issues has to do with the trigger. And so to this point, the weapon that was used in this instance has been made safe by the mechanism of a lock through the cylinder. But during his testimony, I would lay what I believe would be the proper foundation to allow the court and ask the court if we could remove the lock from the cylinder, actually put it in the position where the trigger can actually be pulled in the manner in which the state contends it was done that night. And after talking about the foundational questions with respect to the amount of force that it takes to pull the trigger, I would be asking the court to allow any juror who wishes to actually have the opportunity to pull the trigger, supervised by Mr. Weitzel, who can kind of ensure that they can do it in a safe manner, having the weapon pointed down. But I would ask the court to allow any juror who wishes to pull the trigger in a single action and then double action. Because under the case of Myrick versus the state, which is 155 Georgia App 496, kind of stands for the proposition that the jury gets the opportunity to examine and evaluate the objects that are introduced during the trial. They list photographs, guns, and even a whiskey bottle, so that they can evaluate for themselves the evidence that was presented in the case. And so the only prohibition is the jury cannot do things in the jury room which has the effect of introducing new evidence. So it wouldn't be proper for them to do it in the back if we didn't give them, in my opinion, the opportunity to do it here.
Okay, how would a juror handling a piece of physical evidence be introducing new evidence?
I just flagged it for the court.
Okay.
Because it's what the case said. I didn't want to misrepresent anything to you.
Okay, appreciate that.
Yeah, and so that's really not my contention. I'm just telling you that is what the case says. And so I would be seeking to do that here, and I just kind of want to flag it for everyone and have the court be thinking about that.
Okay.
You got it?
He's resilient.
It's not in my, it was on a bad surface. Okay.
Oh, here it is, here it is.
But I'm over here. Mr. Harper. So, Mr. Harvey, your thoughts about what Mr. Rucker has just requested?
Well, there's a difference between handling the evidence and actually doing an independent demonstration of that. Handling the evidence means physically touching, viewing, and I think the rules are somewhat different for firearms. So I would suspect that they would be, in other words, if we had that entire table of firearms, I don't think it would be appropriate for jurors to do anything but pick it up and look at it as opposed to pointing and pulling the triggers, you know.
As to those firearms, I think that's a fair observation.
So I would distinguish the case that Mr. Rucker relies on. If I had had some additional notice, I may be a little more able to articulate what I think would be perhaps a 4-3 argument with regard to that. Because now you're going to have, if one juror does it, every juror is going to stand in line and start pulling the trigger. So,
Well, I'll tell you my thoughts, and I'm going to research it some as well, and I'm going to ask that Mr. Weitzel not be one of the first couple witnesses this morning, so everyone can be processing this. If the jurors ask during their deliberations, could we have the gun so we can try to pull the trigger, I would likely say yes. It would need to be out here with everyone watching, not them back there. And so as I was processing what Mr. Rucker was saying, it was a question of when as opposed to if. I will be persuaded by case law that says, no, it's an if, not a when. But assuming it's a when and not an if, be thinking about that as well. If you would prefer it to be now pre-deliberations, because that was the other distinction I was thinking of. They aren't deliberating yet, and so maybe they ought not to be holding the pictures and looking at them, although sometimes pictures are shared with the jury rather than published up on a screen. That's the way they're published. So I can see parallels in both directions, but I'd be surprised if the case law said that the jurors, that it would be improper for a judge to allow jurors to do what Mr. Rucker has described during deliberations, but out in court supervised for safety's sake, etc.
Well, and of course, there's a big difference between doing it during deliberations when it can then go back and discuss it, as opposed to doing it now, where I think the impetus to discuss it, would you think, how was that? Do you think that was that? Would be almost impossible to avoid. But that is precisely what they can do and how they can proceed in deliberations. So I think there is a distinction between doing it during deliberations and doing it during the testimony of a witness.
Sure. Okay. I appreciate you flagging that, Mr. Rucker. Let me think about it. But I've expressed my initial sense, which is it ought to be able to happen. It's more of a question of when. Would it be while the witness is testifying, pre-deliberation, or ought it to be deferred to deliberation? And you, of course, could say in your closing, hey, I encourage you to ask the judge to do that. There's nothing inappropriate, I think, if you saying that in closing, and then if it comes up, we facilitate it. But let me do a little research as well.
Sure.
Anything else from the state?
No.
Okay. Ms. Clark-Palmer, good morning.
Good morning.
Anything from the defense?
No, Your Honor.
Okay. Well, let's get the jurors in here. I bet they're antsy.
All jury members are present and accounted for, Your Honor.
Thank you, Deputy Murphy. You all can be seated. Good morning, jury.
Good morning, Judge.
Good to see y'all. Today, how late are we going? 6. Okay, 6-ish. And I'll remember your observation that if there's a natural break point at 5:45, that's when we should break. We'll see how things flow. Hopefully it didn't mess up your routine, because by now you must have a routine that I said you could be down here by 9:30, but Deputy Murphy let me know everyone was here in plenty of time, so thank you for that. We will return to the state's presentation. Who is the state's next witness?
Good morning. Your Honor, State calls Ms. Kaisey Wilson.
Do you swear and affirm that the testimony you should give the court today will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, I do.
Yes, ma'am, if you will, have a seat. Get as close as you can to the mic during your testimony, please. For the purposes of the court's record, please state and spell your name.
My name is Kaisey Wilson, Kaseywilson.
Good morning, Ms. Wilson.
Good morning.
Please introduce yourself to the jury, tell them your name again, and where you are currently working.
My name is Kaisey Wilson. I work for the Georgia Bureau of Investigations, Division of Forensic Sciences, commonly known as the State Crime Lab. I'm a forensic toxicologist.
And what does it mean to be a forensic toxicologist at the crime lab?
I test biological specimens such as blood, urine, and other bodily fluids for the presence and absence of alcohol, drugs, carbon monoxide, and other volatile substances.
And how long have you been working for the crime lab in that capacity?
Over 16 and a half years.
And do you have a training and educational background that allows you to do that job?
I do.
Tell the jury about that.
I have 2 degrees. I have one in biology and one in chemistry from the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga. I started working at the crime lab as a laboratory technician where I assisted the scientists in their day-to-day activities. In November of 2002, I was promoted to a forensic toxicologist where I went through the alcohol training program, drug training program, carbon monoxide training program, and other volatile substances. All of that training includes quality measures, instrumentation, how to perform the testing, look at interpreting the data, presenting those findings in court. Also pharmacology. Pharmacology is what the drug will do to the body and the body will do to the drug. I also have a course in pharmacology from Dr. Holbrook from Mercer University.
Say it again. You have what the course in?
Dr. who?
Dr. Holbrook
Okay.
from Mercer University, and I also have attended the Robert F. Borkenstein course on alcohol and highway safety, and that was at Indiana University.
And as a result of all that training and the employment and all the years that you told us about, have you had the opportunity to testify before in court?
Yes, I have.
About how many times?
Over 200.
Okay, and have you been tenured as an expert in Fulton County before?
Yes, I have.
Your Honor, at this time, the state would tender Ms. Wilson as an expert in the field of forensic toxicology.
Mr. Harvey, any objection to that?
No objection.
Ms. Wilson, you are qualified as an expert for the purposes of these proceedings in the field of toxicology.
So you told the jury about a lot of different roles and titles. Right now and back in 2016-17, what was your specific role sort of day-to-day at the crime lab?
And my primary focus is alcohol testing, both in living individuals and post-mortem testing. I also do carbon monoxide testing and other volatile substances.
And give the jury an idea of how the process really starts at GBI. How is evidence received, and what's the first thing that happens?
The evidence can be received three ways. We can receive it in a hand-to-hand transfer, meaning that the person who's delivering the evidence goes right up to the window and hands over the evidence into our evidence receiving area to an evidence receiving technician. We can also receive it via U.S. mail or postal service, FedEx, UPS, and then we can also receive it via a lockbox. And the lockbox is a locker that the evidence will be placed in. The door is locked and it can no longer be accessed by anybody outside of the GBI. So the people will go, the evidence technicians will then go retrieve the evidence from this lockbox, and then it will go into a cool storage until it is entered into the crime lab database. An evidence receiving technician will take out the evidence, look at the submission form, enter in the information from that submission form, and it will get a unique identifying case number and barcode, and the barcode is affixed to the evidence. It is then sealed or inside of a plastic bag, and a photograph is taken, and then it awaits an evidence receiving until it comes up to the toxicology section for testing.
For items that are received into a lockbox or some other way, at GBI, is there a specific sort of order? If an item has multiple services or multiple stops really within the crime lab, tell the jurors, is there an order? Who gets it first? What section of the lab gets what first?
With the blood evidence, toxicology will get the evidence first. And so it stays in our section unless biology will then submit a request to come over and pick up the testing if there's a reason for biology to need the evidence. As to other evidence that is received into the laboratory, I know there is a chain of command of order that it'll go through, but our evidence usually just comes straight to us.
For this specific case, did you receive items? Tell the jury what you received and where you received it from.
May I refer?
Sure.
The laboratory received a sealed package containing 3 tubes containing blood identified as collected from Law&Crime McIver, and that was on September 29th, 2016, and it was via the lockbox from the Fulton County Medical Examiner's Office.
Okay. So in this particular case, the 3 tubes that you described, they come from the Fulton County Medical Examiner.
Yes.
Once they come into the office via lockbox, what is, you told us about the unique case number that's assigned. What is the unique case number that's assigned for that submission?
For this one, the DOFS case number is 2016-10-28446, and the toxicology section received item 6.
And item 6, where does it go after it gets its unique case number? What's the next step for it?
It is moved from the evidence receiving area up to our toxicology section, and it's placed in cool storage there as well, and only accessible by other toxicologists or trained staff.
And what is the testing that was done with the sample that you received from Law&Crime McIver?
I performed the blood alcohol postmortem testing.
As a result of your testing, eventually your conclusions, did you generate a report?
I did.
Right. I'm going to show you what has been marked and shown to defense counsel, the State's Exhibit 308. Take a look at that for me. you recognize States 308?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, and how do you recognize that?
It is a copy of the official report that has my signature on it.
And is 308 a true and accurate copy of the report that you authored?
Yes,
Appear to have any changes or deletions on it?
it does not appear to be.
Your Honor, I'm going to tender States 308 and set.
Mr. Harvey, the usual, it's in the record.
Yes.
No objection to that. All right, it's admitted into the record.
You told the jury about the testing that's about to happen on the samples that came in from the Fulton County ME's office. Tell the jurors, give them an idea of how the testing works for what you're about to do.
Okay. Once I'm assigned to the case, I will take the specimens and I will sample it twice. And then I will place it on a headspace gas chromatograph with a flame ionization detector.
You're going to have to slow down on that one.
Sorry, headspace gas chromatograph, flame ionization detector, mass spectrometer.
What is that?
That's basically the instrumentation we use. We will gently heat the specimen to release the alcohols from the blood portion into what we call a headspace, which is above the blood specimen in a vial. And that vial really kind of looks like a medicine vial that you would get an injection from the doctor's office. So it will release those alcohols into the headspace, and then the instrumentation will take a portion of that headspace and it will then go through what we call a column. And that column is it looks like a very thin straw. The analytes will interact with that column for a period of time, and it will come out at the detectors at a specific time, which is what we call a retention time. So we actually split our sample. At the end of the column, part of it goes to a flame ionization detector where it is actually quantified. Basically, the number of carbons in the specimen will burn, and it will give us a graphical representation of how much carbon is in the analyte that we're looking at. It will also then reach a mass spectrometer, which basically the molecule is energized and it's broken apart and each analyte has its own particular pattern. So we kind of call it like a fingerprint for that analyte. So we get 2 pieces of information twice. So we basically get 4 pieces of information every time we run a test.
And why do you get the 2 pieces of information twice?
Basically, the flame ionization detector, we do it twice in 2 different orders to get 2 results. And those 2 results are averaged, and that's what appears on the report. It has 5%, we do 5% for both those results have to fall within from the average to be a valid test. The mass spectrometer is used to identify that it is the analyte that we are looking at. And so we look at both of those to make sure, and it compiles with the report.
And so the 2 numbers, the 2 final results that we talked about from that testing, is it from those 2 results that you're able to get a blood alcohol number or a conclusion in your testing?
Yes.
Tell the jurors the steps that you just described to them in detail. Are those the steps that you followed with the testing of the sample from the ME's office in this case?
I did.
And as a result of that testing, or was it a valid test as you just described?
It was.
As a result of that, were you able to determine a blood alcohol content for the sample that you had?
Yes, I did.
And tell the jury, what was it?
Ethyl alcohol result by gas chromatography was 0.108 plus or minus 0.005 grams per 100 milliliters, and that's 100 milliliters of blood. 108 grams per 100 milliliters.
Just so the jury has a little bit of context about that number, tell the jurors what is the legal limit or sort of the per se amount here in Georgia?
The per se level for Georgia for an over the age of 21 driver is 0.08 grams per 100 milliliters.
And what is this number sort of in relation to that in a way that might be helpful for them to understand?
It's approximately 1.4 times higher than the per se level.
Let's tell the jurors just generally, as a result of your training and experience, are you familiar generally with what the substance alcohol does to the body,
Yes, ma'am.
and tell the truth about that.
Alcohol is a CNS depressant, meaning that it's going
I'm
to...
sorry, what the person?
A CNS, or central nervous system depressant. And what that means is it's going to slow the information processing from the brain to your spinal cord and to your nerves and your muscles. So it's going to slow everything down. Basically, alcohol is dose dependent, so the more alcohol you have, the more CNS, or central nervous system depression that you have.
As a result of this central nervous system depression, are you able to observe any other characteristics that come from consuming alcohol? What kinds of things are observable as a result of consuming alcohol?
Depending on the level, alcohol at lower levels, such as up to a 0.05 grams per 100 milliliters, you would not see any outward manifestations of intoxication. Between a 0.05 on up, you can start to see slight signs, but not maybe detectable by the layperson in the signs of CNS depression. It's not until you get upwards of 0.1 to or above that you might see some of the outward manifestations, such as maybe you're unsteady on your feet or you're having difficulties doing fine motor tasks. And even more, you will actually see the staggering gait. Maybe it would lead to coma or even death later.
And when you say fine motor tasks, give the jury an idea of what you mean.
Fine motor tasks, like if you're trying to operate a motor vehicle and you're using your blinker and the radio and the air controls, you're going to maybe miss the control to adjust what you're using.
And for the concept of time, how does time, the passage of time without consuming alcohol, affect a number like the one we have on the board right next to you?
Over time, once someone stops drinking, basically you have an absorption phase, which I like to use the ladder of a slide to take into account the number of drinks that you have. The number of drinks is how high you're going to go on the slide. Then you're going to do a peak time of before you will start the elimination process. So the peak is where you're sitting on top of the slide, and then the elimination part is where you're going to slide down the slide. So your body is getting rid of the alcohol during that slide down to go back to zero.
And is it possible to have your sort of peak time after your last drink?
Yes.
So it's possible to be on the way up after you stop consuming alcohol?
It depends on the stomach conditions. If you are on an empty stomach condition, you're going to absorb the alcohol in approximately about 30 minutes. If you have a slight amount of food in your system, you're going to have, it'll probably delay the peak up to about an hour. And if it's even a heavy meal, then it would be even up to 2 hours. Your peak would be delayed.
Is there anything about the type of alcohol that affects the numbers we've been talking about, whether it's wine, liquor, beer? That just means if, depending on what you're drinking and the percentage of alcohol that is in the substance that you're drinking is what's going to affect the numbers. So you may have to have more cans, the volume will be different. So you may have to have more cans of beer to equal, 2 glasses of wine to equal, 2 shots of liquor. And does the size and the dependency or the familiarity of a particular person with alcohol affect the number?
The familiarity with drinking does not necessarily affect the number. The only part that it does affect is the elimination process. The elimination rates could be anywhere from 0.01 to 0.025 grams per 100 milliliters per hour. And that is for over 95% of the population. The other part of the population could have even slightly higher metabolism rates of alcohol.
And what about males versus females?
Drinking the same amount of alcohol, like the man and the woman are drinking 2 drinks, the man will have a lower blood alcohol level than the female.
And why do you say that?
Because the water content between a male and a female is different. So the male has more water content because they have more muscle. Females have less water content because they have more adipose tissue.
For the number that's on the board, the .108, you told us that this sample was post-mortem. Tell the jurors about, does your testing change in any way when you receive a sample from someone who's actually high?
No, our testing is exactly the same.
And that .108 number that we see, that would be Ms. McIver's blood alcohol when?
At the time of death.
Does the fact that the sample came after the time of death affect that number that's on the board?
No.
Just one moment.
Hold on 1 second. Don't say anything else on the record, okay? You guys keep talking, don't get anything on the record.
Okay, no problem.
On the record.
Ms. Wilson, just a couple more questions. You talked about stomach contents for the answer to one of my questions. When you say a full meal, give the jury an idea of what you mean. A salad, a meat and a side. What is a full meal in the context of the numbers we've been talking about?
Okay, for the 2-hour elimination rate, or 2-hour peak, would be a full meal would get, I was always taught a salad, a full plate of spaghetti, dessert, bread. That's what I would consider a full meal.
In regards to this test and the unique GBI number that you told us about, did you receive any other samples for testing, any other blood from any other individual?
Not to my knowledge.
And once you completed testing on this particular sample, did that complete your involvement in this matter?
It did.
I don't have any other questions, Your Honor. Can you read it?
Charlie.
Thank you. I'm getting utensils from both sides. Good morning, how are you?
Good morning.
So how are you? Answer the second one.
I'm fine, thank you.
And, may I take a page out of the playbook? Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, Your Honor.
Good morning, Mr. Carter.
Thank you. Okay.
You see it works.
GBI is the state crime lab, right?
We're part of the state, yes.
Yeah, it's called the GBI State Crime Lab, right?
It commonly is the Division of Forensic Sciences.
And it has a number of divisions at the crime lab, correct?
The Division of Forensic Sciences does have several different sections, yes.
Yeah, so the crime lab has different sections. If my words are not quite right, you know what I'm asking you, right? You got to say yes or no.
Yes.
Okay. Your particular division and your particular job and function there is to perform tests to determine alcohol content or other kind of blood content. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. That's one of your functions, right?
Yes.
And other divisions within the division perform specific other tasks, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So it is, and you can refer to that whenever you'd like. On 9/28 of 2016, right, was when your division received blood?
We received it on 9/29.
9/29.
Yes, 2016.
All right, 9/29. And you received that blood from a medical examiner's office?
Correct.
The medical examiner's office had already performed the autopsy and had drawn blood and preserved that blood to send to you, correct? That's what you understood.
That is my understanding, yes.
And when you got it in your division, does it go into a refrigerator? Does it go into some particular place where it is preserved?
Yes, we do put it in cool storage, the blood specimens, as soon as they are received at the lab.
And does it come in little vials like test tubes?
They do, with stoppers.
Like purple top stoppers or other type stoppers with any preservative in it?
They do.
Okay. And that's to preserve the content of whatever substance might be in there, correct?
It's to preserve the life of the specimen, yes.
Okay. But when you received it on the 29th, you tested it also on the 29th?
No, sir, that was at a later date.
Okay. Tell us when you tested it.
May I refer?
Of course.
I tested it on 10/26/2016.
10/26/16 is when the testing was done, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And that's why I asked you about getting it in a test tube. When you get it in a test tube, it contains preservative. You put it in a place in which it is kept cool, correct?
The preservative is already in the tube and the sample is mixed and then it is placed in cool storage, yes.
Right, exactly. So that sometime later after you get it in your division, you can perform the tests that you told us about, right?
That is our normal course, so yes, that is how we did it.
And you also told us a little bit about some of the things that may affect blood alcohol content, BAC, right?
Yes.
Okay. The height and weight of the individual?
Yes, those are important.
Okay, so what information did you have about the height and weight of the individual?
I did not have any information as to the height and weight of the individual.
Okay, but that's, let's see, height and weight affect ultimately the way alcohol is absorbed in the body, correct?
Height and weight would affect how many drinks that you would need to consume to get to this alcohol level.
Okay. That's one factor that is included. Well, those are two factors, actually, that are included, correct? Height and weight is something that you need to know how alcohol affects a particular person.
Height and weight is how much or what you would need to actually use to calculate the number of drinks somebody would have consumed to get to this level.
Okay. You also told us about stomach contents or food, correct?
Correct.
And particularly, perhaps, the type of meal, right?
Yes.
Whether it was, for example, a salad or a steak, right? With baked potatoes, with some bread, with some dessert, that makes a difference too, right?
The types of foods could affect the calculation of how much somebody would need to have to get to a certain peak alcohol concentration, yes.
That's exactly what you were telling us before, right?
Yes.
Right. The time also, the time when the drinks, both the time of the ingestion of the alcohol and or the food, correct?
To do the calculations, yes.
Yeah.
The time would be based on food and on when the last drink occurred.
I mean, all of this is something we're talking about to get to a particular calculation for a particular person, correct?
If I was calculating the number of drinks based on the alcohol concentration I have tested.
Here it is. Okay. All of those are factors in making determinations about how a particular person's blood alcohol level is obtained and what it means, correct?
I'm sorry, I don't know if I understand your question.
Okay. We're talking about factors that would weigh into making a determination of someone's blood alcohol content and how that blood alcohol content would affect potentially that person, correct?
The blood alcohol content is the blood alcohol content. I would just use the blood alcohol content taking into these factors how much they would have had to have consumed to get to the level that I tested.
Okay. Well, if you had a height and weight for a particular person, could you work backwards?
Yes, making certain assumptions.
Right. If you had the type of food and the type of meal in conjunction with the height and weight, could you also factor that in and work backwards?
If taking all the factors, yes, I could make a determination as to approximately how much somebody would have drank.
Okay. But you didn't have, in this particular case, a height or a weight, correct?
Correct.
You didn't have anybody that gave you a particular meal, correct?
Correct.
You didn't have a particular time frame between the ingestion and the drawing of the blood or the time of death, correct?
I did not have any particulars other than the result that I received from the time that the blood was drawn.
Okay. We also know that there are different types of blood that can be drawn to be tested, correct?
Correct.
Different kinds of fluids that can be drawn to be tested, correct?
Correct.
Well, and I'm going to give you an example of that. It's not, you can test blood from where? The heart?
Yes.
Okay. You can test what's called peripheral blood.
Yes.
You can also test blood from veins.
Most of our testing is from, especially in traffic situations, is the peripherals, so it would be the veins.
Okay. Here's my question. You can take it from the legs, for example.
Yes.
You can take it from the jugular.
Yes.
Is there a particular place, a particular type of blood that is best for testing? Or does it make no difference whatsoever?
It just depends on where they've collected the specimen as to what we test for, or which one we're testing. If it's the peripheral, usually it's in a peripheral site, usually in the femoral, which is in the leg, the femoral vein. It can be from the iliac, it could be from the subclavian, it could be from the heart.
Is there any difference, though, between potential results from getting blood from one location or another?
It depends on where they're at in the their cycle of drinking. If they're in the absorption phase, the central location, such as the heart, would be higher than a peripheral location. If they're in the elimination phase, meaning that they're eliminating the alcohol or metabolizing the alcohol, the peripheral site would be slightly higher than what the central location would be.
Okay, so In this case, do you have any information with regard to whether this particular person was in the absorption phase or the elimination phase?
Without knowing the cycle of drinking, I would make the assumption that they are in the elimination phase, but they could be in the absorption phase. And I do not know.
Maybe I missed my own question here, and perhaps I didn't ask it correctly. Do you have any information as to whether this particular person was in the absorption phase or the elimination phase?
I do not.
Thank you. Do you know where the blood in this particular case came from?
If I may refer, we received 3 tubes of peripheral blood.
Okay. So in this particular case, it's peripheral blood and not heart blood, correct?
According to the submission form, correct.
And the submission form came from the medical examiner's office?
Correct.
I also understand that you did more than one test, correct?
We do 2 analysis.
And we saw the number. The number was 0.108, right?
Correct.
Plus or minus 0.005, correct?
Correct.
So we've got a range between 0.103 to what?
0.113.
0.113. Those are the possible ranges, correct?
For the 2 results to fall within, yes.
Yes. In either case, you told us that it's over the limit that the state of Georgia has determined that is legal for you to drive, correct?
Correct.
Because that's 0.08. At 0.10, there are certain motor functions that are impaired, correct?
There are some motor functions that are impaired, yes.
Which is why Georgia, I guess, establishes a 0.08 as a base level for legal driving, correct?
That, yes.
One of the other things that you need to take into consideration also is the how much the person drinks on a regular basis.
If you're talking about if they drink multiple drinks over a period of time, yes, they can build some tolerance to practice tasks, such as walking and talking. Driving would be a different scenario.
Right. I'm not talking about driving, I'm talking about walking and talking. Someone who drinks on a regular basis can build up some tolerance to any impairments with regard to walking, with regard to talking, and with regard to an awareness of their surroundings, correct?
If they drink on a regular basis, yes, they could practice those tasks and become more familiar with those at that level, so they would be able to mask the signs of impairment.
Okay. And deal with ordinary responses to questions and ordinary tasks, correct?
If they can practice, yes.
Yes. Oh, if they can practice, people need to practice talking.
Yeah, with consuming alcohol, yes, they would need to practice drinking and talking at the same time.
It's like walking and thinking at the same time, I guess, for me. But someone who drinks on a regular basis, on a social basis or other basis, and interact socially when they are drinking all the time, is more likely to be able to continue to complete their tasks and be responsive to those tasks, correct?
If they're simple tasks,
Like sitting.
yes.
All right. One more, please, Judge. Thank you, Judge. That's all the questions I have. Thank you.
Mr. Convery, any redirect?
Just a few, Your Honor. Ms. Wilson, the height and weight of a person, the amount that they had to eat, the type of meal, does any of that affect the number in your calculations?
It does not.
Tell the jurors why the delay in time that you received the sample and the actual testing took place isn't an issue for the sort of scientific reliability of your testing.
One thing is the samples are in cool storage, so that preserves the life of the sample. We also test gray stoppered test tubes. The gray stoppered test tubes have preservatives in them. It has an anticoagulant that prevents the blood from...
They have a what?
An anticoagulant, meaning that the blood will not clot up inside the blood tube itself. And it also has a antimicrobial, meaning that if bacteria is introduced into the sample, it will not make its own alcohol inside the tube. And I did not see any signs of that, or it would have been listed on the report.
And when you get a sample and you're about to perform testing, do you check to make sure each of those safeguards are still accurately in place so there's no signs of any disruption of the sample?
They are in cool storage, or when we open the test tube, we're inspecting for signs of if the sample is clotted or if the sign is putrid, meaning that it is microbials are growing inside the tube producing alcohol.
And did you note any of that in this particular case?
No.
The actual number, the .108, is that number affected by that sort of time gap there in between when you all actually received it and when you were able to perform the testing?
No, they should be pretty close to the time as to when the sample was taken, meaning that if anything, it might decrease slightly over time, because just like in our testing, alcohol will move from the blood that's inside the test tube into the headspace above the blood, and so when you open that stopper, that alcohol is lost. So it might be slightly lower than what it was at the time, if it's definitely kept at room temperature for an extended period of time.
And is that why the GBI actually has it stored in cooling?
Yes.
The .005 number that you told us about, that variation between the two samples, is that number a scientific variation that's accepted within your community as far as your testing is concerned?
That is our measurement uncertainty, meaning that we like our samples to be the exact same every time, but due to the slight variations in the blood or the actual drawing of the sample or the actual testing of the sample may be slightly different, so we give it a range. So it's plus or minus 5% of the average.
I don't have any other questions.
Questions from the jurors? Thank you, sir. The body stopped processing alcohol upon death.
Yes, it does.
Do you know if any analysis of Ms. McIver's blood was done to determine the presence of drugs, controlled substances?
I do believe there was a toxicology postmortem request, and it was performed.
You did not perform that?
I did not.
Are you able to respond, based on your experience, to the question of whether that amount of alcohol in the blood would cause someone to bleed more rapidly if they had a serious injury? Does that question make sense?
I believe it
Does it have
does.
any effect on the rate at which blood would exit the body if there was an injury to the body?
Depending on, it might thin the blood slightly, so you may bleed a little bit faster or you won't clot as fast, but it would not affect the medical treatment that you're going to receive.
You said you will not clot as fast?
You may not clot as
May not.
fast.
Okay, thank you. Any follow-up, Ms. Convery, based on those questions?
No, no.
Mr. Harvey?
No, sir.
All right, thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Next witness.
Your Honor, at this time, would you please read the stipulation?
Yes, ladies and gentlemen. In response to one of the questions you just posed, the following stipulation from the parties, and this is a stipulation signed by Mr. Harvey on behalf of the defense, initialed by the defendant, Mr. McIver, signed by Ms. Griffin on behalf of the state. And the stipulation is that both parties stipulate that the blood sample belonging to Landa Diane McIver and collected from her after her death was sent to the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, GBI, for toxicology post-mortem testing. Mary Jo Brasher, who is a different forensic toxicologist with the GBI, tested the sample to determine the presence of amphetamines, cocaine, and cocaine metabolites. The results of that testing were that the sample was negative for the presence of amphetamines, cocaine, and cocaine metabolites. You may receive that as if Ms. Brasher came in here and testified to those facts. Next witness.
The state calls Sarah Peppers.
Yes.
Do you swear and affirm that the testimony you should give the court today will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Yes, ma'am, if you will, have a seat. For the purposes of the court's record, please state and spell your name.
Sarah Peppers, SARAH, PEPPERS.
Good morning. Could you please introduce yourself to the jury and let them know your name and where you're currently employed?
My name is Sarah Peppers. I am currently employed at the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, Division of Forensic Sciences, in the Trace Evidence section.
And how long have you been employed with the GBI?
I have been employed at the GBI for a little over 8 years.
And what is your current position within the Trace Evidence section?
I am a scientist in the Trace Evidence section.
And what exactly does your job entail?
One of my primary duties is to analyze evidence for the absence or presence of gunshot primer residue.
And what exactly is a microanalyst, or what your job title is?
A microanalyst is what we typically refer to as a scientist in the Trace Evidence section. We are typically dealing with evidence that cannot be seen by the unaided eye and that can be transferred between people or between people and objects or between objects.
And can you please tell us a little bit about your background, education, and training to become a microanalyst for the GBI?
Yes. I earned a Bachelor of Science in Biology with a minor in Chemistry from Clayton State University in May 2009. Upon being hired by the Georgia Bureau of Investigation in December 2009, I underwent a training program that was specific to the analysis and significance of gunshot primer residue.
And approximately how many cases have you analyzed for gunshot residue?
At this time, I have approximately analyzed about 750 GSR kits.
And have you testified before in the courts of Georgia as an expert in the field of gunshot primer residue analysis?
Yes, I have.
And how many times?
Approximately 45 to 50.
And have you testified in Fulton County as a gunshot residue expert?
I have, yes.
And, Your Honor, at this time, you'd like to tender Ms. Peppers as a witness, as an expert in the field of gunshot primer residue analysis.
Mr. Harvey?
I don't have any objection, thank you.
All right. Ms. Peppers, you are qualified for the purposes of these proceedings as an expert in the field of gunshot primer residue analysis.
Directing your attention to GBI case number 2016-102-8446. Did you receive any evidence under that case number?
May I refer to my notes?
Yes.
Yes, I did.
And what evidence did you receive?
I received a package containing a plastic bag, and then I also received a package that was identified as containing a holster.
Okay. I'm going to show you what's been previously marked as State's Exhibits 387, 388, and 458.
I'm sorry, Ms. Griffin, could you give me those numbers again, please?
State's Exhibits 387, 388, and 458.
And 387 is which? Oh, you got to identify them.
Yes. I'm going to show you State's Exhibit number 387. Do you recognize that?
Yes, I do.
And what is that item?
This item is a sealed package that was identified as containing a brown holster.
Okay. And I'm going to show you State's Exhibit number 388. Do you recognize that?
Yes, I do.
And what is that item?
This item is a package containing a plastic bag.
And I'm going to show you State's Exhibit number 458. Do you recognize this item?
Yes, I do.
And what is item 458?
These are stubs that I actually created in the laboratory as part of my examination for gunshot primer residue analysis on the plastic bag.
And with regards to State's Exhibit number 387, how do you recognize this item?
I recognize this item by the unique barcode that has the Division of Forensic Science case number applied to it, and then also by the description on the package.
And are your initials anywhere on this item?
No, they are not,
And why not?
because I did not analyze this item of evidence.
Okay. I'm going to show you State's Exhibit number 388. And how do you recognize this item?
Again, I recognize this item by the GBI barcode that has the unique case number and item number. Then I also recognize this item by my initials where I sealed it, and also where I wrote the case number when I opened the package.
And State's Exhibit number 458, how do you recognize that?
Again, the barcode is applied to this item, and also these are the stubs I created, so I recognize it by my writing on the package describing them as such.
And do these items appear to be altered or tampered with in any way?
No.
You are in permission to introduce State's Exhibits number 388, 458 into evidence.
Not 387.
No.
Okay. Any objection to 388 or 458? Okay. 388 and 458 are admitted.
And you, with regards to item number 387 that you said you did not analyze, could you please explain to the jury why you did not analyze the holster?
The holster was submitted for gunshot primer residue analysis. The presence of gunshot primer residue indicates that an item has been in the presence of a discharging firearm or has come into contact with an item bearing GSR. So because the holster would contain a gun, which would have an item that you would expect to have GSR present on it, there was no additional value to be obtained for testing the holster specifically for gunshot primer residue.
And Ms. Peppers, could you please let the jury know when you received this evidence?
The laboratory received the evidence on December 29th, 2016. I specifically received the evidence, the plastic bag, on January 9th, 2017. And then I created the stubs from the sampling of the bag on the same date, January 9th, 2017.
And you said that the evidence was received by the GBI on December 29th, 2016?
That is correct, yes.
And which agency submitted the item, the plastic bag, for testing?
That item was submitted by the Fulton County District Attorney's Office.
Okay. And you said that you did not test the item until January 9th?
That is correct.
Could you please explain the time difference in between when the item is received by the GBI and when you tested the item?
When the item is received from the GBI, it is typically submitted into our lockbox system in the laboratory, and then it is entered into our laboratory information management system, or LIMS, and the unique barcode is applied along with the unique item number. That item is then, we see what requests are made on a particular item, those requests are added, and then that item is transferred throughout the laboratory to get to the proper person to perform that testing.
And what type of testing were you asked to perform on the plastic bag?
I was asked to perform gunshot primer residue analysis testing.
Okay. And if you could please describe to the jury what is gunshot residue?
The primer is a shot-sensitive material that is composed primarily of the elements lead, barium, and antimony. When the trigger of a firearm is pulled, the firing pin strikes the base of the cartridge case, which is where the primer is housed, and this allows for enough of a force to ignite the primer, and then the bullet is expelled from the firearm, and the primer is expelled through any opening in the firearm and allowed to settle on things in the environment.
And does every type of gun emit the gunshot residue primer?
I mean, typically revolvers and semi-automatics would all produce some sort of primer.
Okay. And if I could, let me have you open these up. I have scissors, I'm not running with them.
Would you like me to open both?
Yes, please. And if you could, Ms. Peppers, would it be okay if she stepped down?
Sure, as long as she wearing that fancy, well, if she's away from the microphone, she's been doing well. You've been able to hear what she had to say, but let's strap up the microphone if she's going to be moving away from the desk.
Okay. If you could, Ms. Peppers, if you could step down and show the ladies and gentlemen of the jury the bag that you tested, and were there any defects in the bag?
Yes, so this is the bag that I tested for gunshot primer residue, and as you can see, there are some defects present in it.
And what type of defects are there?
They appear to be some sort of holes.
Okay, if you could just walk around.
Some sort of holes.
And hold it up, so. And Ms. Peppers, when you did your testing for the gunshot residue on that plastic bag, how did you perform the testing?
So when we are asked to perform gunshot primer residue analysis testing on an item or an object, we use what we refer to as stubs. These stubs are aluminum discs that have a carbon adhesive tape applied to them. And so how the sampling occurs is that I dab these stubs with the carbon adhesive tape over the area that I would like to sample, and this adhesive tape picks up any particulate matter that may be present on the item that I can then analyze to see if any gunshot primer residue is present.
And which areas of that bag did you test for the gunshot residue primer?
So in particular, I sampled 4 areas. I sampled the outside of the bag, the inside of the bag, the outside area around the apparent holes, and the inside area around the apparent holes.
And when you say outside and inside, how did you distinguish between which one was the outside and which one was the inside?
My notes indicate that I used the logo that was present on the bag as an indicator as what would be expected to be the inside or the outside.
Okay. And when you tested each area, how did you test it? Did you rub the aluminum over the bag or?
No, you don't rub it over the bag. The adhesive tape is sticky, so you just dab it over the indicated area until that tackiness is lost.
And after you collected, you did the samples, what was the next step in your process?
So the next step in the analysis is to use a technique called using a scanning electron microscope with energy dispersive X-ray spectroscopy, or SEM-EDS. This is a technique that has a high-powered microscope so that I am able to visually see what is present on the stubs that I use to sample, and then it also has a detector attached to it so that I can see what the chemical makeup of each of these individual particles are, so that I can look for particles consistent with gunshot primer residue that contain the elements lead, barium, and antimony.
And after you collected the samples to process them, what were the results of your testing?
The results of my testing were that the examination of the adhesive stubs used to sample the bag revealed more than 5 particles characteristic of gunshot primer residue.
And when you said that the results were more than 5 particles, was that for each area that you tested?
So I had a total of 4 sample stubs from one bag. I confirmed 2 particles of gunshot primer residue on each sample for a total of 8, or a conclusion of more than 5. But there could have potentially been more GSR, but the addition of more particles would not alter the conclusion or the significance of that conclusion.
Okay. And when you say more than 5, would you please explain what that means?
Yes, so when I say more than 5, it means that I found more than 5 particles characteristic of GSR on the samples. In this particular instance, it was 2 confirmed GSR particles on each stub, but as I mentioned before, there could potentially be more. And we report out what we find on each sample. So if we only find 1 particle in total, that's what our report will say. 2 particles, that's what it will say. So when we say more than 5, that is our highest conclusion that we write in our report, showing the amount of GSR on a person's hands, or in this case, an item.
Okay. And is there a scale that you all use? 1 to 5, 1 to 15, anything like that?
There's not really a scale. In instances where we only find 1 or 2 particles characteristic of GSR, we do have a statement on our report that could indicate that the forensic significance of that finding could be limited, because there have been different studies conducted that have shown that, for example, if an individual is arrested and then taken to a police department, they could potentially pick up 1 or 2 particles from being in a police environment. And so we do have a scale as to whether we're going to put that statement on our report. And so in instances where we have more than 3, we know that that is not from a source of contamination. That's a source from either the item was in contact with an item bearing GSR or was in the presence of a discharging firearm, but did not come from a secondary source.
Okay. So when you mean like it didn't come from a secondary source, it's not like if you had GSR in your hands and I touched your hand, is that what you mean, like from a secondary source?
That could potentially be, or if it was just on the surface of like a counter or something like that, and then you were to lay your hand on the counter and pick it up that way.
Okay. And when you talked about GSR emitting from the gun, could you describe like how the plume is that it comes out? Like, you know, when is it like a huge cloud of GSR that comes out, or how is the GSR emitted?
So again, the GSR is going to be...
Stop for a second.
Is it qualified? This witness as to that's more firearms than it is testing. This is a microanalysis. So I'm a little bit, let me object to whether or not this comes within her sphere of expertise. If it does, fine.
Sure. So why don't we explore first with this witness if she's in a position to help the jury understand this based on her training and experience.
Okay. Based upon your training and experience, Ms. Peppers, have you had any education about how gunshot residue is emitted from a firearm?
Yes, so as I mentioned earlier, the primer is going to be expelled through any opening in the weapon. So it's also going to travel down the barrel with the bullet and then be expelled if it's a revolver through the cylinder, if it's a semi-automatic through the ejection port, and all of those openings present in a weapon.
And have you had any training on how it is, or any firearms training on how gunshot residue is ejected from the firearm?
Well, as I mentioned, I'm familiar with that. It's going to be expelled through any opening in the firearm and be expelled up to certain distances, like traveling with the bullet and things of that nature.
Sure. Can I object to the answer? The answer was here's what the training told me, not the training that I had. So I think, sorry.
That's okay. I think it's somewhere in between. She said she's familiar with how it works. She didn't say how it in fact worked. But I'll ask, how is it that, please Ms. Peppers, don't say, here's what it looks like when it happens, but tell me and the jurors and everyone else listening, what parts of your training allow you to answer a question like, when a shot is fired, things are expelled in this direction, or in a cloud, or more like projectiles. What about your training would enable you, if you feel like you are able to answer a question?
Okay. So my training includes the research and background into how GSR is produced, what part of the firearm it is expelled from, and so I'm familiar with several different studies that have been conducted over how far GSR can travel, where it is expelled from the firearm, and things of that nature, because that relates to the significance of our findings in that manner.
Okay. Don't answer yet, please. Ask the question you'd like to ask that initially prompted the objection.
Okay. When GSR is expelled with the bullet, when it comes out of the gun, does it emit in a cloud, or does it go straight with the bullet? How is it emitted from the gun?
Okay, I will overrule the objection based on what I've heard and allow you to answer that question.
So again, the primer is expelled in this vaporous cloud when the trigger of firearm is pulled, and so it's expelled through any opening in the weapon in this cloud, and it does in fact travel with the bullet as well.
Okay. And do you know how large the cloud could be?
I'm not familiar with an actual size or how big the cloud could be.
Okay. And when GSR particles are emitted from the weapon, is there any particular location that they could fall?
They would fall in anything that would be in the path of where the plume is expelled from. So wherever that plume landed, that's where those GSR particles could potentially travel along with the bullet.
Okay. And so if I fire a weapon and my hand is on the trigger, could GSR get on my hand?
Yes.
Could it get on my clothing?
Yes, it could.
Could it get on my legs or anywhere like that?
Yes, it could potentially, yes.
And in this case, if the weapon was fired and it was completely concealed in the bag.
And let me object to the hypothetical.
She's an expert, she can get something.
Well, I don't think the objection is you asking a hypothetical. It was the nature of the hypothetical?
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
If a gun is completely wrapped inside of this plastic bag, is it possible that GSR in my hand, the gun is wrapped completely in the bag and my hand is on the trigger from outside the bag, is it possible that GSR would not get on my hands?
and I'm going to object to that.
Okay, overruled. Do you understand the question?
Yes, so may I answer?
You may answer.
Okay. So even if your hand is on the outside of the bag, that plume is going to emit from the weapon. So if there is any gapping in the bag or anything that would allow the plume to get to the outside, including if a bullet was expelled from the bag, that could all be a potential for some to still get on an individual's hand. Now, would it be as much as I would expect if the hand was not on the outside of the bag? Probably not, but there's still a potential, even if the hand was on the outside and the gun potentially was on the inside, that GSR could still land on an individual's hand.
Okay. And what if the weapon is concealed in the bag and my hand is also in the bag with the weapon?
In that instance, you would definitely expect for an individual that discharged a firearm in a bag with their hand in the bag for GSR to be on their hand.
And we talked about testing for GSR on substances. Can you test for GSR on your skin or on your hand?
Yes, you can.
And is there a different test that you would use to test for it on your hand as opposed to on the surface?
The actual testing is the same. I still use the same technique of scanning electron microscope with energy dispersive X-ray spectroscopy. However, energy dispersive X-ray spectroscopy.
That's not already in your dictionary?
And so the technique would be the same, but just when you are sampling an object, we're using the same stubs that would be used to sample an individual's hands.
Okay. And can you wash GSR off of your hands?
Yes, you can.
How long typically, if you don't wash your hands or do anything like that, can GSR remain on the skin?
It would be hard to give an exact time frame. As time goes on, you would expect for GSR to fall off an individual's hands just as they go about their day, as they come into contact with different things. That's all going to be an opportunity for GSR to fall off an individual's hands. And I would typically not expect to see any GSR from a particular shooting incident after 12 hours on someone's hands.
Okay. And if GSR is on my hand, and let's say I pull my shirt out of my pants and I wipe my hands on the shirt, is it possible to remove the GSR from my hands?
Object to that.
Did you follow the question?
Yes.
Okay, I'm overruled, you can answer.
Okay, so yes, that would be a potential for GSR to transfer from an individual's hands to their shirt.
Okay. And what about if I wash my hands?
Yes, I would expect for any GSR present on someone's hands, had they been washed, to be dissipated by that.
And when we talked about the cloud that's emitted when a firearm is fired, can you see this plume with the naked eye?
Yes, you typically can.
Okay. And you said that the GSR could be found with the bullet. Could you, if the bullet went through an object or a seat, could you test for GSR on that seat?
You could potentially test the item for GSR. However, again, when we find GSR on an object, that indicates that the object was in the presence of a discharging firearm or came into contact with an item bearing GSR. So if you have an object that has a bullet defect in it, you already would be aware that that item was in the presence of a discharging firearm. So the exam itself for GSR would not add any probative value in that instance.
Okay. And in this case, did you receive any items collected from a seat in this case?
I personally did not receive any items. I'm not aware if the laboratory did.
Okay. And when you all receive items from the to be examined, do you all request items or do you just get what is received?
We typically receive items from outside agencies that have submitted it, along with a submission form with what requests they would like for analysis.
With regards to the GSR, are there any other things that would have the same elements as what you would find from GSR testing?
There are other sources that contain the elements that I'm looking for, lead, barium, and antimony. However, these sources have found to have other elements that we would not expect to find with GSR, such as high magnesium or high iron, or they may also have a poor morphology, which is what the particle actually looked like, because you would expect for GSR to have a molten or rounded morphology and not a jagged morphology. So in some of these instances, there have been, for example, brake pads could produce particles containing lead, barium, and antimony, but they typically have high iron and also poor morphology.
And also,
What was that you used, I think, morphology, what was the word?
Yes, morphology.
does the amount of GSR present signify the closeness of the GSR to the gun?
I would not be able to say specifically that. I mean, you would expect for something that is closer to a firearm when it's discharged to potentially have more GSR on it, and then as you get further away, you would have less and less GSR, but the actual amount I would not be able to quantify.
Okay. And can you see GSR with your naked eye?
No, you cannot.
And Ms. Pepper, did you prepare a report of your findings?
I did, yes.
And I'm going to show you State's Exhibit 310. Would you review that, please? And is that a copy of your report?
Yes, it is.
And do there appear to be any alterations or deletions to the report?
No, there does not.
Is that a true and accurate copy of your report?
Yes, it is.
Your Honor, permission to introduce State's Exhibit 310 for the record.
Any objection, Mr. Harvey, to 310 becoming part of the record?
No.
Submitted.
No other questions, thank you.
Okay. We're going to take our morning break before we see if Mr. Harvey has any questions for you. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, head on back to the jury room in just a minute. We'll try to get you back out here around 11:25. We need to break for lunch at 12:20, which is why we're stopping now, even though we're in the middle of a witness. We didn't want to stop at noon and then stop again at 12:20. So we'll have a medium break now, and then lunch will start at around 12:20 today. Thanks for your time and attention. We'll see you back out here shortly.
All rise for the jurors.
Mr. Rucker, anything before we break? Is Mr. Weitzel coming up fast?
Yes.
Okay. My research has given me comfort that at a minimum for the jurors to explore the trigger pull during deliberations and for you to invite them to do so in your closing is appropriate, legal, acceptable, etc., and not error. I haven't found a case on point about moving that forward to the evidence presentation phase. Not saying it's not out there, but I want you to know as you go into the break, at a minimum, I'm prepared to certainly say that in your closing. And absolutely, should the jurors want to do that, they may do that during their deliberations. I found several cases where you say that that is not new evidence.
Okay.
So at a minimum, that's where we are. But I'm also willing to hear from the defense on that, and you may want to talk with them about that during the break. Sure. Okay. Anything from the defense before we break? All right, when we get back, Mr. Harvey, I'll see if you're ready for cross. Thanks.